Welcome everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. We're going to get started. It's 12:01, and then people can just come in as they're being admitted. My name is Yesenia Ramirez. I am one of the founding parents of Parent Teacher Home Visit. I'm also the senior advisor for the organization, and I'm really happy and excited to be here with all of you and share with you this webinar about relationships of trust. Families and educators reflect on gains, losses, and lessons learned during the pandemic. We really want to really share with you about or learn together, share with each other about what lessons, what did we learn in this past pandemic year, and also, what fears do we have for the upcoming post-pandemic new school year? Again, welcome everyone. On our next slide, really quickly, we have an agenda for you, and as you can see here on the slide, is we're going to do some introductions, some housekeeping. We have a fabulous panel with us today, and we're going to have that panel discussion. We'll have some small group breakouts, so you'll have a chance to share with each other, talk with each other. And then we'll have a whole group sharing as well. There will be some recommendations and action steps. And then right before our closing remarks, we'll have a back to school toolkit to share with you as well. So really quickly on our housekeeping, just to let you know, we are recording this webinar. It will be posted to our campaign webpage, and you can access this webinar after today at our website, www.pthvp.org. Back to school campaign. It's also going to be, it's already dropped in our chat box. We're going to ask you to please have your phone handy and bring up this page. We will be asking you to do a wool clap with us, and the code for that is pandemic feelings. And also feel free to share or tweet out or any social media that you use. What are some of the learnings that happened for you out of this webinar today? And as you can see there in the chat box, it's also in there for you. Now I'm going to ask my dear colleagues, which are going to be part of this webinar along with myself, to introduce themselves really quickly, so you can also get a chance to hear from them. So Gina, you want to start?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Gina Martinez-Ketty. I'm the Executive Director of Parent Teacher Home Visits, and I'm really excited about today, and thank you for joining us.
Rachel?
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Bryce, and I'm the Program Director at Parent Teacher Home Visits. I'm just delighted to have you all here today and be a part of the conversation.
Thank you, ladies. So on our next slide is the wool clap that I was sharing with you on our housekeeping. So if you can pull your phone out and go to that, remember the code is in our chat box if you need that. And just answer this question: what is one word or phrase that describes how you are feeling as we enter this post-pandemic school year? If you can share that with us. Nervous, frazzled, anxious, unsettled, optimistic, hopeful. Those are great sharings. Thank you. Nervous, I see. I think we're all very nervous of the unknown, right? We don't know what's what's going to happen when we go back. We're all nervous. Families are nervous. Our educators are nervous. So um, it's um, it's going to be a new learning for us, just like it was last year with the pandemic. We all had to learn how to do distance learning. Now we're going to have to relearn how to go back. How do we start that that re-engaging, re-teaching, and hopefully it'll be a new beginning for us coming out of this this pandemic that we all lived through. So yeah, I still see some some of you are confused. I feel confused. I don't know what's gonna happen. Um, I'm yeah, I see ready, and that's great. I love that. I love that I saw ready because I want somebody to feel ready because I'm feeling nervous and I'm feeling confused for all of our kids, not just mine. So it's really reassuring that some of you feel and hopeful. I think we're all hopeful of what's
Yesenia, you're on mute.
I don't know how that happened. I think we're all hopeful that this coming year will be better than even when we left before, right before the pandemic. So thank you again for sharing and for putting your feelings out so we can see them. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Gina, and she is going to introduce our fabulous panel that we have with us today. So, Gina, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Yesenia. And again, thank you all for joining us today. I see some familiar faces and I see some new faces, so I'm so excited to see you all here. So Yesenia, yes, we do have an amazing panel of experts with us today. I always say that if I want to learn about schools, some of the best people to talk to are the people that are there every day, day in, day out with their children and with their students, right? And so please join me in welcoming our panel of educators and parents today. We are joined by John Knoxheim, who is a school social worker in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. Also, we're joined by Valerie Solorzano, who is a parent in Sacramento, California. Chrissy Valento is a middle school art teacher in Duluth, Minnesota. And then also Corinda Anderson, who is a parent in St. Paul, Minnesota. So panelists, thank you so much for joining us today. So this panel is really an opportunity for all of us to listen and learn about our panelists' experience during this whole pandemic experience, to hear from them what they have gained, what they've lost, and some of the lessons that they've learned along the way. And so you'll see here some of the questions that we'll be exploring with our panel today. We may not get to every single one in the exact order that they're listed here, but overall, we do want to hear a little bit about what their COVID story has been, what have been some of the highlights, what have been some of the struggles that they've experienced during this time. And then also to hear from them, what are their long-term hopes and dreams for the future of schools in general? So, so those are the questions, and we're dropping the screen so that we can see our panelists a little bit better. And so let's go ahead and get started with the first question. So first of all, panelists, if you could just take a few minutes and briefly just share with us, what have been the highlights and the struggles that you've experienced during this whole pandemic. And, think about that both from kind of a personal perspective, but also particularly from your perspective as people in schools. Okay. So John, let's go ahead and start with you on this one.
Hi, everyone. And I'm just going to start this out by saying I still cannot get used to doing this via Zoom. So I'm not a technology guy, but I wish I was seeing people in person. But and thanks for joining today. I think this is an excellent topic. So, you know, my COVID story is probably not different than most of you. If anyone out there lost loved ones during this, I get it. Lost my father-in-law and most recently lost my dad. If you have kids in school that were struggling and you were frustrated getting information and how to navigate this, and your child was exhibiting some frustration and maybe some mental health concerns, I'm right there with you. I have the same issue. Not only am I an employee in my school district, I'm also a parent in our school district too. So I can see that from all those angles. You know, how my COVID story starts is my wife and youngest daughter and I were on a trip in San Francisco, and it's my favorite city in the world. So from Minnesota to San Francisco, there was no one there. It was a ghost town. And we didn't understand the severity of it at that time in the Midwest. So we spent a week in San Francisco and ran into maybe a few hundred people the whole time there in this major metro area. Little eerie, little surreal. But then we fly back to Minnesota, and we flew out I'll remember this forever. We flew out at 11:59, and at 12 o'clock that next morning, that 1 minute away from when we flew, that's when California instituted a lockdown. So anybody there needed to quarantine for 14 days. So we made it out just in time. You know, the airport in San Francisco was full of people with masks and hazmat suits. And it was just a really interesting kind of surreal thing. But then getting back to Minnesota, that next day is when our district decided we're going to extend our spring break for 2 more weeks to really figure out what to do. And I think that's where as a parent and an employee, that's where my story begins here. Is a lot of frustrations, a lot of changes, a lot of emails from our district, which from an employee end, I'm like, this is great, they're communicating. As a parent, I'm like, wow, this is a lot of information. And it kept changing day to day, which was the nature of what we were doing. Once we kind of figured that out and we're back in the buildings, I'm one of the employees who did not have an option to work from home. I was directed to be in the schools each and every day, which for someone like me was perfectly fine. I would have volunteered anyway, because that's where I belong. But it was during that time we were getting a lot of questions and emails and phone calls to my principal and myself, were the only 2 in the building, really, frustrated with parents, frustrated with not understanding, not knowing what to do, technology issues. And that's when I decided, I'm going to just do every home visit I can with every student I can. Every parent who calls with a concern, I'm going out to figure out what can we do. And that's what I did. I'm no stranger to home visits. I worked child protection for over 20 years. It was my livelihood. It was my everyday. So I brought that same attitude into the schools, and this, I felt, was a perfect time to have this happen. So I remember there's a couple stories. I remember one sitting in a driveway of a van with a grandmother who had 5 grandkids, and they were all in different schools and different grades with different platforms. And she was totally overwhelmed. How do we log in? How do we do this? The connectivity issues were there. I remember delivering hotspots and food to the family because those were 2 issues that were in need. But sitting in the van one by one with each kid, and it was a snowstorm, in March here in Minnesota, and sitting with each kid and really going through, this is how you log on, and helping this grandmother who took on this responsibility of all these kids to help her with that. And how valuable that was for her, and how much that was needed, because I think we just assumed, oh, kids know how to log on and everything's good. The next story I had was when we have a transitional housing program in our community that serves all of St. Paul. And I went out there to meet with some of my families who resided there as temporary housing, and we walked in, but there was no staff at this housing complex. So it's usually a secure building. The doors were locked, typically locked. And when I got there, all the locks were broken on the doors. There was garbage everywhere. There's no staff to be found. And I really just wanted to check on those families, make sure they had what they needed, because they were families who really needed some extra, help. And I remember walking through the building and connecting with my families, and I'm leaving. This other parent comes up to me and says, "Are you from the school?" And have my badge on. I said, "Yep." And she goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just checking on some families, making sure they're okay." And she said the most telling thing to me that really then dictated my year, if not longer, after that, was she goes, "I wish someone from my school would come out and make sure I'm alive." And it wasn't me making sure people were alive. It was making sure people had what they needed and they had questions and they really support. And that just really hit home. Like, we should all be doing this. We should be out there, seeing the families as much as we can. Then we'd lead into the next school year. And I decided to bring that same attitude in. The 2020-2021 school year was, I'm going to go out to every family that needs support. Kids that don't show up, I'm going to go out there. And so I sent that message to the school, especially the high school I'm at, and said, if you don't see a kid for 2 days, let me know and I'll get out there. And that's what we did. We went out and I remember I went to this one home with this 15-year-old, and she didn't say a word the whole time, but at the end, I was asking her and the mom, like, where has she been? I see her grades are really struggling. What can I do? What can I help with? And this girl's just bawling. And so, of course, I'm like, oh, great. I upset her. This isn't going well. And come to find out from the mom, it wasn't that she was upset. She was like, someone cared enough to come out and check on me. And for me, it was just a simple act of doing that I really felt like, that was important piece of what we needed to do as a school district. So just wanted to share those couple stories, and thanks for being here, and thanks for listening to what we have to say. So,
thank you, John. I am going to ask Valerie to respond to this same question next. I know, Valerie, you're short on time today, so Valerie may duck out at some point, but we're going to try to hear from her as much as possible before she has to leave. So Valerie, for you, what has been your COVID story and some of the highlights and the struggles that you've faced during this time? I think they're trying to get off of mute here. Yes.
I would say it's been all been a struggle. Hopefully, I hope to see some highlights this coming school year. It was just really hard with my child already struggling before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and it just made it 10 times worse with distance learning, and me having to also be his teacher, but be a parent and go to work and take care of my other child. It kind of made it a lot harder for me to really be on top of his schoolwork. I have my mom. She's the best help that I could ever ask for. But it was, hard no matter what, because we didn't know anything about distance learning and the whole technology thing. And he didn't get to go to the first day because we couldn't get his login correctly. So I'm hoping for the highlight, I would say, was trying to do both distance and in person. I feel like it was a great idea, but might have, kind of confused the kids as well with, having to be on the computer. They're at home and then going into school and having to, learn about things they learned 2 days ago while they were on the computer. That looked like it was a challenge, for my child as well. So I am hoping to see a lot of highlights this coming school year. I know it is also, it has to be difficult for the teachers. They were, new to it just as much as we were. So, I have a lot of patience this coming school year as well. So that'll be a good thing.
Good. Thank you, Valerie. And I do, because I know, Valerie, you're going to have to leave in a little bit. So I do want to do a follow-up question with you here. because, you know, you talked about kind of some of your own confusion about how to make the transition into distance learning and what was happening and how to do it. And John also talked about that some of the families that he met with had that same kind of confusion. But I'm wondering, Valerie, did anybody, like, what did the school do, or what could the school have done to help you kind of clear things up around that confusion? Because I know for John, he went and he met with the family and he worked with each one of them to figure it out, right? But I'm just wondering if there was any help for you from the school, and if so, what was it? And if not, what could they have done?
No, honestly, there was no help from his school. It was, you know, pretty much, here's a computer, here, we gave you a login. Because they gave us a login when the pandemic first, you know, came through, and they started giving out computers and things like that. So when they returned to school in September, you know, they said, oh, do you have his login from March that we gave you? And I didn't. You know, it was so many months ago, so many things have happened in between those months. So they did not provide the help that I would have, you know, liked. Like, it would have been great if somebody, you know, like John, you know, how he helped everybody individually. That way would have made it a lot better.
Thank you, Valerie. So let's turn to Chrissy now with the same question: highlights and struggles during the pandemic.
Hi, good afternoon. I think back to March of 2020, and I just think of how March, the week of during the 12th, I think Friday was the 13th, and our governor in Minnesota said that he didn't feel a need to close schools, that wasn't something he saw in our near future. So I remember going out shopping and getting some supplies I needed for my lesson that was coming up. And my daughter was visiting from college, and I have a junior in high school still at home. And we were just kind of going about our business. And then boom, I felt like everything came to just this crashing halt. And March 17th was a Tuesday, and it was our last day. So students were kind of told very quickly, you are going to go to school Monday and Tuesday. You're going to clean out your lockers. You're going to take home everything you need. And then we're going to have some days off and give teachers some time to kind of regroup, I guess, and then figure out how we were going to teach online. So I think all of us teachers were everyone's heads were spinning, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to make this work. I do work in a middle school where 25% of our students are on IEPs. 75% of our students are on free or reduced lunch. So we have a lot of students with a lot of needs, all different types of needs. So I think one of the highlights to me was how well we were able to kind of rally and figure out what was important, what needed to come first. We were all of us teachers, staff people were assigned kind of a group of kids to reach out to. So that's what we started to do. We knew we had to do something. So we started to reach out to kids on our list. We had probably 15 or 16 students on our individual list that we would call, email, however we could get a hold of them, and just say, hey, what do you need? And like John mentioned, there were staff people running to people's houses, bringing hotspots. We were calling families to see, do you have internet? Does it work well? Do you have devices? Do you have a Chromebook? I mean, and if they didn't have those things, we would drive to their homes and get them those things. So that's kind of how we started. It was just kind of a mass frenzy of what's most important right now, making sure our families had food. There were definitely families who were really struggling with just having meals every day. So we really tried to figure out what the needs were first. And then we just tried to teach online the best we could, March, April, May. We were even given a date of May 4th that possibly we'd be back in school. And of course, that date came and went. We were never back in school that spring. School ended in June. We collected devices that we had handed out during that time. Summer came, which I kind of think back to last summer and think, did we even have a summer? It's almost like we had a 15-month COVID school year, really. But once fall came, those of us trained in parent-teacher home visits, which our school has been a part of this program for probably 5 years now. We decided in the fall, oh my gosh, this is the best way to reach families is by doing parent-teacher home visits virtually. So those of us who were trained teamed up when there were kids coming back in the fall and kids we weren't hearing from and families we weren't reaching. That's how we tried to reach them, was through parent-teacher home visits. And it really helped those families that maybe didn't even understand what a parent-teacher home visit was. I mean, we had tons of sixth graders, of course, who didn't get to have that experience of starting middle school, because in Minnesota, here in Duluth, our middle school is 6th, 7th, and 8th. So in our building, we have about 700 students, and 250 of them are scared, nervous sixth graders who didn't get to experience walking into their building and starting that middle school experience from elementary school. So we really found that parent-teacher home visits was a great way to reach out to as many sixth graders as we could, to have them feel like they were part of the building, part of the middle school experience. So those of us trained hit that really hard, which was a total highlight, because there were kids who were supposed to be coming to Google Meets and they weren't showing up for whatever reason. I had one of my sixth graders say, Mrs. Valento, I have no time to come to Google Meets because my mom and dad are veterinarians and they're so busy and they need our help. So imagine all of the family stories and experiences and things that were going on that we had no idea about, because families were just trying to cope, and sometimes their last thing on their list was to come to a Google Meet with their teacher. So we just found that was one helpful way, for sure, was to reach families. And then the school year continued on. We were still teaching online all of fall, all of winter, and we did not have kids back in the building until March 8th of 2021. So it was almost a full year before we actually got to see students in the building. And we did kind of a hybrid model. We had half of our students come couple days of the week, and then the other half came the other days of the week, Thursday, Friday. So at least that was exciting to us, like, oh, we get to have students in front of us finally. But you could just see even middle schoolers who are usually so excited to see their peers were very hesitant with the mask wearing and having to sit so many feet apart from their peers, and you can't touch your peers. And, you know, middle schoolers, they're such a social group and they want to touch each other and be together and eat together at lunch. And so, of course, that was very challenging to have. We were excited to have them back in the building, but everyone, I think, was really leery because vaccines they were just starting to roll out in our state at that time. So I think once we got kids back in the building, we were hopeful. It was definitely better. We could have students actually articulate in front of us, like, Mrs. Valento, I know you never saw me the whole time we were online, and I couldn't come to Google Meets because even though we received a hotspot, it wasn't working in our home. It is so much nicer to be in the classroom. And these kids were kids who were failing all of fall, all of winter. And when they came back to us in the spring in person, you know, they were doing great. So I just found that so telling and so interesting. And the fact that they could articulate to us that it's so much better being in school. I can't learn, I can't do my work at home. It's just not my learning style. It's not the way I do school. So that was super interesting. And I guess I'm just really hopeful that teachers are doing a lot of self-care this summer. so that we're ready for fall. I'm really, really hoping that all of the technological things we teachers learned in this past year, that we can move it forward, that it can be a positive, that we can reach more kids from what we've learned. I mean, we had to roll out, here's a modality that we have to use. We're going to teach online. Okay, now we're going to teach hybrid. Okay, now students are going to come back in the building. I mean, we're constantly reinventing or trying to reinvent the best way to get information to kids and have them learn. And so I'm really hoping we can take what we learned in the past year, take the positives, and move them forward into the fall, because we start end of August, beginning of September. So that's what I'm hoping for.
All right. Thank you, Chrissy. I've been noticing in the chat box a lot of people putting in kind of, comments about how they can relate to what you all have been saying so far, and kind of expressing the hopefulness for the coming year as well. So thank you. So we're going to move to Corinda now. Corinda, would you share with us what your COVID story has been and your highlights and struggles?
Yeah, so here in St. Paul, kind of some of the things that you're hearing, like, from Duluth, like I can echo, right? Like, listening to Chrissy's story and even John and White Bear, it's like, wow, like, so in Minnesota, we all kind of were experiencing the same thing as a collective. And St. Paul was a little bit different. I am a trainer for the Parent Teacher Home Visit Project. I do it nationally. I also do it locally here in St. Paul. And the educators were actually on strike. They had went on strike at the beginning of the week. And then I think we were like 2 to 3 days into the strike. And then we got the superintendent was like, well, hey, we're ending the strike, and we've come to an agreement. And kids aren't coming back to school because we're shutting the schools because of COVID. And it was like, well, they had already kind of been home for a while. And so I was like, okay, that's good that they've been home. And so I kind of got used to like what that would look like without there being any like schoolwork being done. So lucky for a lot of us, we were able to kind of have like a soft place. But then it was kind of a hard blow, because it's like, now the kids aren't going to school. And then, for us here, I don't think my daughter started getting like any like type of classwork or anything like that until like almost April or sometime in May. And then, so with her being older, thank God, it was a lot easier for us, because, she's always on her iPad. And so she knows how the technology works, and it's just me and her in the house. So we don't have a lot of different bodies that are using the internet. So she's not struggling with things like that. They did offer, things like the hotspot, like I heard John say that they had delivered, and Chrissy or whatnot. But we didn't really need those resources, right? But I had friends who would have 3-4 kids, and they'd have only one Chromebook in other districts, and like all the kids were to use this one, tablet or whatnot. And so it like presented a lot of frustrations for a lot of my friends. And then when the thing with George Floyd happened, and it was just like kind of like another knock in the side of the head, so educators are on strike, and some parents were frustrated about that. Others of us rallied around educators, right? And then they shut the schools because of COVID. And so people are frustrated. Our educators are frustrated. Students are frustrated. Parents are frustrated. And then as a community, as a collective, we all kind of had to step back and look at what's really going on in our backyard, and have the whole world looking at us at the same time, because all eyes were on us at that time, and going from, you're not really able to go out unless like you have like a paper saying you can come and go to and from work, which my partner, he kept working, so he had that ability to do that, but me just kind of being stuck in the house. And then everything like completely shutting down, where it was like, you can't go to the grocery store over here, or this gas station is completely burned down. Like even in my own neighborhood, like they looted like the PetSmart, and just like all these little things. And it was just like a huge cloud of disparity in a way. And so for me and my daughter, I didn't really know that we were struggling with mental health, but it started to kind of rear its ugly head. She was struggling because, she's like, Chrissy said, she's a 7th grader. And so she went to school in the building all of 6th grade, 7th grade. Now she's not in the building and she's not with her friends, and she doesn't, have the ability to create those relationships with anybody. And so she started to kind of act out in different ways. And I noticed different things about her behavior. I was able to get her some help for that. And then, ended up going to counseling. So I feel like that was kind of like I call rose and thorn. I feel like it was a rose and a thorn. I accidentally pricked the thorn, but we got a rose because, right, it uncovered some things for the both of us that we were able to take care of and, ongoing take care of. But then at the same time, it was just kind of like, what do we do next year? And I'm thinking, oh, well, everything will go back to normal. And so then school ends, and every week we were kind of getting like notifications from the superintendent, and they were offering like town hall meetings where you could come virtually and kind of voice your frustrations or get information about what's going on. And throughout that year too, I kind of remember one bouncing back and forth. I remember like one of her teachers, her 1st grade teacher, actually posted online like the steps she had to go through to just create one of her lessons for her students because they're so young. So she had to create the lesson, and then she had to upload it here and then convert it like this and upload it this way and then add this in and drop this in. And she's like, it's taking me 6 hours just to teach one lesson. And it's not conducive for what we're trying to do for students, and so I know that a lot of educators were really, really frustrated that they didn't have the supports that they needed, or, around like teaching and reaching all of the students. For my daughter, I feel like in junior high, like a lot of the educators granted a lot of kids grace, which I felt like, especially after the George Floyd thing, a lot of kids really, truly needed that. Like they needed grace. Like, so if they didn't show up, you would get like a little text message, or I remember one of our educators would just send out a mass email. He didn't name students. He would just say, hey, your student may or may not have been in class, have not seen them. I would like to see them. These are my office hours and things of that nature. And then, I'm thinking, okay, 8th grade, she'll be able to finish out 8th grade and go back into the building. And when school came back, it was like, no, we're not there yet. Right. And how Chrissy said, it was almost, like toward the end of the year, it was like, I think like the 3rd quarter, and they were like, okay, now the kids can come back. And I'm like, well, there's no point in her going back now. The school year is almost over, and the back and forth. So like Chrissy was saying, like having one group of students come on these days and another group these days. And I was just like, it's just too many moving parts. And so I was one of the parents that actually opted to keep my child home instead of sending her back, even though she did want to go back, but again, right, I was blessed because I had an older child. So I just felt a lot of frustrations, like from even some of my coworkers that had like kindergartners and 1st graders, and it's like, what do I do with my baby, during this time? Daycare's not open. I can come to work for a couple of hours, but I can't come, full time. And everybody was frustrated about, money and things of that nature. Some of the things that I feel like the district did very well for us is that they did provide, like, a couple of the other districts in Minnesota here and hopefully around the country, they provide the hotspot option for families. They did provide like, lunch options. So they would send out like weekly food boxes. And at first they were actually delivering them directly to your house, which was, I think, an amazing thing. And then like, again, like just the district kind of sending out those notifications or whatnot. So I feel like with what resources we knew we all had, they did the best that they could. I just wish that there was more on the back end with educators, like more conversation around like what was the best possible way to deliver, lessons to students, because it did create a lot of frustrations with educators. I seen that firsthand. But yeah, like pretty much for us, that was kind of what we dealt with. A huge rose for me out of it, and I'll just kind of end it off here, was that being a single mom, I haven't had the ability to spend that much time with my daughter since she was born. And, and so I was kind of like, yay, like she's here, she's in the house with me. I know where she is. I know what she's doing. I can kind of keep my eyes on her. on her the way that I like. And so I really reveled in that, and I took the time in that. And, you know, I feel like we kind of got an opportunity to pull each other's hair out and then, you know, reconnect and, you know, come back together in a different way with each other. So yeah, that's kind of how things went for me here.
Great. Thank you, Corinda. Gosh, I feel like you all in some ways have talked about some of the frustration, the confusion, the kind of the not knowing what's going to happen or how to do what's needed to be done. And yet there, as Corinda has talked about, there have been lots of roses along the way too, right? There've been lots of highlights that you've talked about. But I'm wondering, and I'm going to turn to you next, Corinda, again, to follow up on kind of the same question that I asked as a follow-up to Valerie, because I'm really wondering, you know, given everything that you've learned and experienced during this pandemic time relating to schools and education, what can the school do to, what do you need from the school to start this next school year in the best way possible for you and your daughter? Corinda, let's start with you on that one.
I think that her educators are definitely, and they're going to need to have a very high level of compassion and empathy. They're going to have a very high level of understanding. They are getting a crop of ninth graders that did not necessarily, like for the past 2 years, they have not been educated in the same formal manner that they've been used to. And so, you know, some of these kids may come back to the building, you know, in the beginning. They might come back to the beginning or the building, maybe like, you know, in the springtime. Their parents may not feel comfortable letting them come the first couple of semesters, right? So I think that they just have to kind of be able to approach all their students from that lens of like compassion and empathy, just because of everything that's kind of happened in the world. If I could get that from our educators, that would be great. Here in St. Paul, we did pause like home visits. We actually just started back doing like kind of bridge trainings here recently. We've done 2 for educators that have had home visit training already. And so we are like actually asking like, hey, like do a home visit if you feel comfortable, you know how, right? You've been trained in that. But if not, then you can do a bridge visit, which is a virtual visit with your family. So we're definitely asking here in St. Paul that, you know, families do that. And so I think that that's going to be the biggest thing like that I could get from my daughter's educators. Because of like this whole project, I am kind of like a self-starter now. Before I wouldn't have necessarily known what questions to ask or who to go and talk to, or, you know, like how to approach it necessarily. I probably would have went straight to each of her educators, which I still will go to each of her teachers personally. But like when they allow me to go back into the building, I plan on going and having my own personal meeting with the principal, the assistant principal, her counselor, you know, all of her teachers. I plan on going and sitting with them face to face and kind of saying, hey, like, you know, if you haven't looked at it from this lens, you definitely have to. And if you know, whenever you see that one there, especially, right, whatever classroom she's in, hopefully you're mindful for sure, right? And then maybe that will carry with you throughout the day. Like, you know, just have a little bit of compassion, because these kids, they're just not used to it, you know?
Yeah. Thank you, Corinda. I think that's such an important point. I also want to put this question to our educators on the panel. So Chrissy and John, as people and as professionals within schools, what do you need from schools in order to start this new school year in the best way possible for you? Chrissy, you want to start us off with that?
When I listen to that question, I think about in our district in Duluth, we have a brand new superintendent who started last year, and then a brand new assistant superintendent. And I have dialogue in my head about things I want to say to him, both of them. So far, they seem to be decent human beings, but I'm really hoping that they're thinking about starting the new school year, reminding us, like I said, about self-care for teachers. I really hope teachers have really slowed down and been taking good care of themselves over the summer, because if we're not caring for ourselves, we're not going to be able to care for others. And so I am really hoping that he starts the school year with that really in mind, that all of us, not just teachers, all staff, people who care for students, social workers, counselors, assistant principals, deans of students, are really able to come into the new year with somewhat of a fresh mind. I think it's a little premature to call it post-pandemic. I don't think we're there yet. But just really being able to go into the school year, knowing where we're going to go, feeling more confident after having been through what we've been through, taking the things that we learned that worked forward, and just really taking what we've learned and moving it forward in a positive way, so that we're not frazzled when October 15th comes around, for example. So
yes.
Those are my thoughts, that admin is really paying attention. Great.
Thank you, Chrissy. And what about you, John? What do you need from schools to start the new year?
You know, I'll answer this. I'll try to be as brief as I can, but so my connection with this is Chrissy and I actually worked together up in Duluth before I came to White Bear, and we brought parent-teacher home visits up to Duluth. And so that was several years ago before I came down here, and we saw the true benefit of it. I didn't know what it was before I was there in Duluth and did some research and found about this program and what St. Paul was doing. So we basically replicated it in Duluth. And that's my same goal for here in White Bear Lake. So I believe in three main things. One, we can't make assumptions about our families and students ever. We can't assume that they're not present because they're lazy or they don't care or whatever. That's wrong, and what we need to not do. I believe schools should be I believe schools should be the first place people go for when they need something. You know, I worked in the county system, but I think schools are where you should go. They're the safe place, and I think that's the place where everyone should turn to. I also believe that it's up to the schools to create trust in the community. And it's not up to the community to come to us and ask for things. It's for us to go out and ask what they need. So, you know, kind of taking those three things, I know my district, I'll speak specifically to White Bear Lake, has really embraced that way of thinking. We have a newer superintendent who started the same year that I did down here. And we're in the middle of a strategic plan where we're really altering the way we do things and the way we look at how we educate our kids, that it's beyond just in the classroom instruction, the social emotional piece, the reaching out, the hitting families where they're at. And it's one of the cores of our strategic plan. And I'm very grateful to our district to allow me to pursue parent-teacher home visits here. So I guess kind of a long way to answer what I need is for our district to continue that, and for the teachers that have jumped on board in this process with me here in White Bear Lake to continue doing so. You know, the way we start these programs, or I've had to start these programs, is to ask for money and to apply for grants. And I remember going through my interview for the White Bear Lake grant to get it started, and being asked, well, how do you do this during a pandemic? Is it still that important? And I said, it's even more important now to do it in a pandemic. So we're going to continue pushing ahead at White Bear Lake, even in spite of some of these challenges and barriers, because the families deserve it. They deserve us reaching out to ask, what do you need, and not make an assumption that they don't care about their child's education, because they really, really do. And I give teachers more credit than anybody, because I could never teach. And I've said that all along since I've been in the schools. No way could I be a teacher. I could be a social worker. So what teachers have had to do has been amazing. And the fact that I have teachers who are jumping on board with me for this has been huge. So that's what I need, and that's what I want to continue doing in my little slice of the world here. So.
All right. Thank you, John. Very inspiring. Last question that I want to pose to our panelists, and for the sake of time, because we're bumping up against a little bit of time here, but if you could just kind of in a few words, the question is, what are your, like in your wildest dreams, what are your hopes and dreams for the future of schools going forward? Let's start with Corinda.
Yeah, so for me, like, you know, you hear about like all these like standardized basics and these standardized practices around the country. No matter where you go, this is a standardized thing. And so I would honestly, my hope and dream would be that like parent teacher home visit project, something like this, if not this, but this model specifically, but right, anything like this, something that would help to build relationships with family would become a standard practice across the country. Like, I just don't think that, I think that every child can benefit from the visit. I've definitely, as firsthand, right, getting my daughter's first visit in the 2nd grade, and here we are now, she's in the 9th grade. And like I said, I feel like a complete advocate. I do feel that, you know, education is a political act. Like, so fighting for public education is a political act. I wouldn't have necessarily like had that lens or looked at things from that, you know, perspective if I never got that first visit, I don't think. And so I feel like this is something that every family should at least be able to experience once or twice in their life, if you're really lucky, like I have been here in St. Paul.
Great, thank you, Corinda. And I do see that Valerie is back on screen. So I'm gonna ask you also, Valerie. So when you think in your most bold and most, you know, long-term and visionary way, what are your biggest hopes and biggest dreams for the future of schools?
My biggest hopes and dreams would be, you know, for this, especially this coming school year that is coming, would be, you know, no judgments, better communication, patience, a lot of patience. This is, you know, a whole different school round, you know, than before. I think that would be what I would like to see. No judgment, better communication, patience, understanding,
Perfect.
you know, really working together.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Valerie. Chrissy, what about you?
I want our students to come back feeling excited, wanting to learn. I think we educators, it's important that we not talk about we're so behind, we're so behind, we're so behind. That's not going to get us anywhere. We just need to move forward. I want our students to, I think social emotional is going to be something we need to work hard on and keep in the forefront moving forward. We need kids to just feel confident and feel good about who they are and where they are. And that needs to come first before we're worrying about hitting every learner outcome that has to happen. Coming out of a pandemic, I mean, we need people to be connected and be trusting each other and feel good being around each other. And Corinda mentioned the George Floyd, and John had mentioned this in a meeting prior that, yeah, in the face of this whole thing, we had that going on too. So we have work to do, but again, we need to take care of each other, and that needs to come first. So that's my big hope.
Great, thanks, Chrissy. And final question over to John. What about you?
You know, I'm going to echo the trust. I think the trust piece needs to be rebuilt. I think we can assume that, you know, in some of our schools that the trust is still there. I think we as a school need to continue rebuilding that trust. You know, we talk about George Floyd. Yes, I'm in a suburb on the outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, but still, you know, 12 miles away was the epicenter of, you know, racial reckoning in our country. And to pretend that that doesn't have an impact out here in the suburbs is wrong, because it has. And White Bear's had its own issues with, you know, some racial issues that had come up during our school year. So I was asked once, how do you address that? How do you deal with that? And my answer back to this group of people were, you get out there and you meet the families. You meet them where they're at. You put yourself out there. You get to know them and ask questions and understand them as individual people and as families. And that's what you do.
I think we lost a video or audio on you, John. At least I did. So I think everybody lost audio on you, John. So I'm just going to wrap up because we are at time, but thank you so much, all of you panelists. Please join me in thanking our panelists for such incredible sharing, such incredible stories, wisdom to share with us. And I just want to end by saying, you know, a lot of what you all talked about are very basic things like trust and communication and showing that you care. And all of that is so, so important for certainly for building that partnership between families and educators. But ultimately, when you have that foundation, I think it also makes a big difference for how teaching happens and how learning happens in school. And so for us to pay attention to those things that are that seem to be so basic, but so critical, I think is important for just how we do schools, you know, overall. So thank you so much again for sharing with us, panelists. I am going to turn it now over to Rachel, who's going to move us forward.
Thank you, Gina. And I just want to say as well, thank you again to our panelists for sharing your personal COVID stories with us. I'm sad we didn't have more time because, you know, our staff has had the privilege to hear details, more details of your stories, and there is a lot of wisdom for you to kind of impart upon us. But the big takeaway is it's really been a tough year and a half. For many of us, the emotions are still quite raw, and we find that it's in part because we haven't slowed down to really process our experiences. So your stories really hit home, and we're so appreciative of your candor. Now, with that said, recovery is going to be a process, and it's going to be a process that takes some time. But I'm sure many of you are grappling with this real sense of urgency to both heal students' pandemic-related traumas, but also to accelerate their learning in the coming school year. But it's our strong opinion at Parent-Teacher Home Visits that the success of this effort really, truly rests upon the well-being of adults and the strength of their relationships with one another. And that belief is what's compelled us to kind of jumpstart some healing conversations here today. And so here's what we're going to do next. We are going to set aside about 15 to 20 minutes to work in small groups of 4 to 5 people. We're asking you to reflect on your own personal COVID stories and what this means for the future family engagement. And just like the panelists, we encourage you to be really open and honest with one another. Now, we do have some guiding questions to help in your conversation. They're on the screen here. Those questions are, what are some common themes shared by panelists? Thinking about your own experiences during the pandemic, what did you gain, lose, and learn? The third question is, how will we engage families in the upcoming school year based on what we've learned about our collective pandemic experiences? And then the last question is, what are some specific steps that you can take as an individual and as a part of a team to connect with and support families? Now, when you get into your breakout rooms, we will post these questions in the chat box for you to refer to, and then we'll also kind of alert you when time is wrapping up. And when we are done, we're all going to come back together as a whole group, and we'll do a brief activity to kind of help consolidate our learning about family engagement in the coming year. So we'll see you all back here in just over 15 minutes or so. Welcome back, everyone. I had the pleasure to listen to some of your conversations, and there were some really fantastic insights that were shared. So I'm excited to be able to afford the opportunity for you to share these with the whole group about what you have learned or reflected on about family engagement today. So to do this, we're going to do a waterfall activity. Now, when I say go, everyone here in this group discussion today should type your response to the question that we have on the screen into the chat box. And we want to know, after listening to everyone's stories today and reflecting on your own experience, what is one key takeaway or one big learning that you have had about family engagement as we enter the new school year? So if this works the way we have envisioned, we are going to just get this flood of great ideas that you can kind of take back with you as we plan for the 21-22 school year. So go ahead, 1, 2, 3. Now I see some things going. So go ahead and enter your response to the question now, and we'll see what kinds of answers we have. Building relationships and understanding that home life affects school life, meeting parents where they are. Building relationships is cited over and over again. High impact strategies. Let's see, building trust and having good communication. Family engagement is about meeting families where their needs are in order to ensure that their children have a successful school year. That families are willing to help us. I think that is really powerful. Zoom can work if planned well, absolutely. We're showing that today. Educators returning to school must establish relationships with students and families. And we have some responses about positions in schools or programs should not be grant funded. They should be just embedded into the budget. Yes, family engagement isn't something that we tack on. It should be just part of what we do. It's not an add-on. It's our way of work. Let's see, family engagement starts before the school year starts. Don't be afraid to try something new. Absolutely. There is a lot of folks who are really supportive of home visiting and family engagement just being part of the general funds versus grant funding. I'm seeing that many times. And just collaboration seems to be another big theme here. So there are some really great ideas for you to think about. I appreciate every one of you participating in both the conversation and the waterfall activity. I do want to remind you that we set today up to just be a starting point in healing conversations. And we encourage each and every one of you to go back to your school communities and start that conversation there and engage in similar conversations. Talk about those same kinds of questions. Obviously, we're here today to talk about family engagement, and you guys are kind of hitting that home today. Family engagement is a key ingredient in all recovery plan. All of our efforts should be centered there first. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it has taught us that learning support at home isn't just something that's nice. It is absolutely, absolutely necessary. So your ideas, your suggestions and takeaways from that question that are in that chat box really kind of summarize that. And if I can just kind of, I know I saw trust many times. If I can just say one thing, if you're gonna do anything at all, first and foremost, kind of think about trust as your starting point. We feel at parent-teacher home visits that trust is foundational to all other recovery and healing efforts, and it's foundational to family engagement in general. And we feel like that will help build those productive partnerships that make our work so much more efficient and effective. Now, I would like to pivot here and actually take a few minutes and share some additional recommendations for you to think about as you work on building relationships of trust with families. So the first recommendation that we have is to tend to educator well-being. And we heard this a couple of times during our panel discussion. It is, I think, we're all in agreement that the pandemic has taken quite a toll on our workforce. School staff, they faced like tremendous stress as they pivoted and adapted to a new virtual environment. We have a lot of educators who are also suffering from secondary traumas as they've worked like double time to support the mounting needs of students. And just like we heard from panelists, educators too, they've experienced significant personal challenges and losses over the course of the last 16 months or so. So in order to heal, we need to think about how we're going to honor their experiences. We need to provide appropriate supports, and we really need to create the conditions that allow for collective reflection and healing. Now, our second recommendation is to build educators' capacity to meet this moment. Teachers often cite effective family engagement as this glaring gap in their professional practice. So we need to be intentional in helping to equip them with both the skills and the mindsets that allow them to build these relationships of trust, as well as to kind of deepen their understanding and implement their ability to implement high impact strategies that engage all families. And I think that's something, I heard this actually in a breakout room. There was a discussion around equity. And I think a big part of this capacity building effort must be ongoing training and reflection to help kind of reveal and disrupt the implicit biases that educators have about students and families. Now, our third recommendation here is, we've all seen this one before, and it's a part of any kind of well thought out family engagement plan, and that is to create a welcoming, culturally affirming school environment. School security and now COVID safety protocols, if you kind of think about it, they have erected these like very literal, very physical barriers of entry that clearly keep families out. So we need to be very intentional, and we need to pay close attention to our practices that kind of communicate to families that they are welcomed and valued. Essentially, we need to kind of roll out that proverbial welcome mat in both our words and our actions. Now, speaking of actions, that leads me to our fourth recommendation. And we've touched on this a couple times today. And it's probably the biggest thing that schools can do to help restore relationships of trust with families in the coming school year. And that is to connect one-on-one with every single family. I get it, it's a huge investment of time and energy, but it's probably the thing that will yield the greatest dividend for you, just because it goes such a long way in communicating to families that we see and hear and value them. And if you kind of think of it this way, I think a lot of people like to think that the worst is behind us, the most challenging parts are behind us. But I feel as though we have some hurdles still. And the best way to get over those hurdles are to do those things that really help build bridges of productive partnerships with families, because if we can work together, it's going to be far easier and more impactful. Now, our next recommendation, it kind of goes along with this. When you reach out to families, it is important to remember to not just kind of talk at them or give them a list of demands or tell them all of the things that are wrong with their child or with their family. Those things don't do anything to help build trust. Instead, we recommend truly listening to families. We feel like you should take the time to help uplift their pandemic experiences. And by that, I don't mean just their struggles, but also take the time to celebrate their successes. We should also find ways to connect on a deep personal level. I heard in one group talking about revealing that there was shared hobbies with families. So, you know, you could connect personally, find some common ground, be vulnerable yourself when you engage with families. And just like we do in parent-teacher home visits, ask them about their hopes and dreams. Get them to share their ideas of what the future of education can be. Now, we see great value in these one-on-one empathetic conversations, but those aren't the only ways that you can listen to families. We do suggest that schools use surveys and focus groups and other forums to really gather data to understand how families experience the school, and then use that information to really inform improvements. And that kind of leads me to the last recommendation on our slide here today, and that's we encourage you to engage all families in planning and decision-making, really particularly as it relates to our healing and recovery efforts. By sharing power with families and kind of co-creating a shared vision for what success will look like for students and for schools post-pandemic, we really help become mutually accountable and mutually responsible to each other, as well as to our shared vision. So again, these are just a few recommendations that you can kind of think about and consider as you work to build relations of trust between families and educators. Parent-teacher home visits, I've said it before, we believe that trust is foundational to all other healing and recovery efforts. And it's really this guiding principle that kind of helped shape our newest offering, which is our back to school toolkit that we launched for teachers and school leaders to use as they enter the new school year. So here we are with the slide. This is a nice little picture of it. We are just so pleased to present our back to school toolkit. It's called Trusting Relationships First. You can access it via a link that's going to be shared in the chat box. And you can also access an interactive version on our website. This toolkit was developed after listening to the stories of parents and educators about what they gained, lost, and learned over the last year and a half. The recommendations that are in this document, while they're rooted in evidence, they really came from parents and educators and what they shared about what they need and what they want moving forward. Now, if you kind of click on that link and you open the toolkit up, what you're going to find is that this toolkit is designed around a central framework that consists of 3 kind of interlocking components that all work together to help create the conditions necessary to authentically engage with families. And the components of this toolkit are building educator capacity and resilience, building trust with families, and creating a school-wide culture that prioritizes high impact family engagement. So if you kind of think about those things and those 6 recommendations that we shared previously, they really do fall neatly within those 3 component areas. So there's the 3 components. And then within each of those 3 components, you will find some common tools and resources. The first is you'll find a set of guiding questions that help you to kind of reflect on both your current state and your desired state around family engagement. There are recommended activities and resources, which kind of include those that we touched on today. And then lastly, there is this in-depth exploration of how the parent-teacher home visits model not only kind of aligns with each component, but actively supports each component. So that's kind of our toolkit in a nutshell. Now, as I mentioned before, we really do encourage you all to bring families and educators together in your school setting to kind of collectively reflect on your experiences during the pandemic. And we believe that this kind of reflection process dovetails nicely with family engagement planning. And so we encourage you to actually use the toolkit and all of the related planning documents as a guide in that process. But please know we're delighted to be able to share this with you, as well as some other resources. I just caught wind that the time is like right there. So we're on our last slide here. Please do feel free to reach out to us. We invite you to contact us and engage in an individual conversation about how we can support your school and your district with family engagement. And then I also want to ask each of you to please complete a survey today. That link's been dropped in the chat box. We're going to use that to kind of shape other future offerings that we can roll out to help you all. And then finally, I just want to stop here and take a deep breath and just say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your stories, and thank you to each and every one of you. It is, I know time is a precious commodity right now, so it's such a privilege to have you be a part of this really important conversation. Wish you all the best of luck in the coming school year, and good luck.